My name is Michael Thompson, and for 15 years, I believed loyalty and hard work would eventually pay off. I was wrong. But sometimes, being wrong leads you to exactly where you need to be. It was 11:47 p.m. when I finally shut down my computer that Tuesday night. The office building was empty, except for the security guard and me, a familiar scene that had played out hundreds of times over the past decade and a half. I'd been working on the automated quality control system, the one that would save the company nearly $2 million annually, the one that would finally get me that promotion I'd been chasing since 2018. The drive home was quiet, just me and the hum of my aging Honda Civic. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see the faint glow of my son's bedroom light under his door. Jake was probably still awake, waiting to ask me about his baseball game tomorrow, the one I'd promised to attend but knew I'd probably miss. Again, "Dad?" His voice was small when I cracked open his door. "You missed dinner. Mom saved you a plate." "Thanks, buddy. How was practice?" "Coach says I might make varsity next year." His eyes lit up, then dimmed. "The championship game is Saturday at 2. You'll be there, right?" The same question he'd asked dozens of times before. The same hopeful expression that broke my heart every time I had to disappoint him. "I'll do my best, Jake. I really will." But we both knew what that meant. Work always came first. It had to. Richard Wilson, my boss, and the company owner, had made it clear that dedication was the only path to advancement. And I was nothing if not dedicated. The next morning, I arrived at Wilson Engineering Solutions at 6:30 a.m., coffee in hand and ready to tackle another day. The office wouldn't come alive for another 2 hours, but I'd learned that early mornings were the only time I could work without interruption. That's when I did my best thinking, my most innovative problem solving. I was deep in code when I heard the elevator ding. Richard Wilson stepped out, looking surprised to see me there. "Michael, you're here early again." He clapped me on the shoulder with that familiar grin. "This is exactly why you're my go-to guy. This dedication, this commitment, it's what separates the leaders from the followers. Just trying to get this quality control system perfected, Mr. Wilson. I think we're really onto something revolutionary here." His eyes gleamed with the look of a man seeing dollar signs. Revolutionary is right. This system could change everything for us. "You know, Michael, I've been thinking about your future here. Great things are coming. Great things." I felt that familiar surge of hope, the same feeling I'd experienced countless times before. This time felt different, though. This time, I had something truly special to offer. The automated system wasn't just an improvement. It was a complete game changer that would put Wilson Engineering Solutions ahead of every competitor in the tri-state area. What I didn't know was that Richard had been having similar conversations with someone else, someone who shared his last name, but none of his work ethic. Sarah Wilson arrived at 10:30 a.m. that Thursday, a full hour and a half after the official start time. She strutted through the office in designer heels and an outfit that probably cost more than most employees made in a week. Fresh out of business school, with an MBA from a university I'd never heard of, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to earn anything in her life. "Dad wants me to shadow the department heads this week," she announced to no one in particular. "You know, learn the ropes before I take on my leadership role." "Leadership role?" I exchanged glances with my colleague Jennifer, who looked just as confused as I felt. This was the first anyone had heard about Sarah taking on any kind of leadership position. Maybe you could start by observing our morning meetings, I suggested diplomatically. We discuss ongoing projects and, oh, I don't really do mornings, Sarah interrupted, checking her phone. I'm more of a big picture person anyway. The day-to-day operational stuff is beneath my pay grade. Beneath her pay grade? She didn't even have a pay grade yet. Over the next few days, I watched Sarah float through the office like a tourist in her own personal museum. She'd pop into meetings for 10 minutes, take a few notes on her iPhone, then disappear for 2-hour lunches with her sorority sisters. When she did engage with work, it was to offer suggestions that revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what our company actually did. Why don't we just automate everything? She asked during one particularly painful brainstorming session. Like, use AI to do all the engineering stuff so we don't need so many employees. I spent the better part of an hour explaining why that wasn't feasible, watching her nod along while clearly not absorbing a single word. Meanwhile, I was putting in 60-hour weeks perfecting the quality control system that would actually realistically improve our operations. Friday afternoon, Richard called me into his office. I straightened my tie and grabbed my project notes, certain this was the moment he'd officially offer me the promotion we'd been dancing around for months. Michael, sit down. His tone was more serious than usual. I wanted to talk to you about your future here. Of course, sir. I've been thinking the same thing. Good. Good. Now, I know you've been hoping for advancement, and I want you to know how much I value your contributions. The quality control system you've developed, it's impressive work. Really impressive. I felt my chest swell with pride. Thank you, sir. I believe it could revolutionize how we approach manufacturing oversight. Absolutely. Which is why I need someone I can trust to help implement it. He leaned back in his chair. I'm bringing Sarah into a management position. She'll be overseeing the technical development department. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah? But sir, she's been here less than a week. Exactly. Fresh perspective, Michael. Sometimes you need someone who can see the forest for the trees. Sarah has ideas, vision. She understands the modern marketplace in ways that, frankly, some of our more seasoned employees might not. Seasoned. Like I was a piece of meat left too long on the shelf. I understand your disappointment, Richard continued, but I need you to be a team player here. Sarah's going to need guidance, and there's no one better to provide that than you. Think of it as mentoring the next generation of leadership. I sat there in stunned silence as he outlined my new role. I would continue doing all the technical work, all the innovation, all the problem solving. But now, I'd report to someone who couldn't tell the difference between a servo motor and a coffee machine. That night, I sat in my car in the company parking lot for 20 minutes before starting the engine. I called my mother from the driver's seat, something I rarely did during work hours. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, honey. What's wrong? You sound upset. Do you remember when I was a kid and I'd work really hard on a school project, and then someone else would get the recognition? I remember you always being upset about fairness. You had such a strong sense of right and wrong. What did you used to tell me? There was a pause. I used to tell you that if you kept doing the right thing, eventually the right thing would happen to you. Her voice was gentle. But Michael, sometimes the right thing doesn't look the way we expect it to. When I got home that night, my wife Linda was waiting up for me. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug without saying a word. "They promoted his daughter," I said into her shoulder. "Oh, honey. 15 years, Linda. 15 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, skipped vacations. And they gave it to someone who's been there 4 days." She pulled back to look at me. "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? The answer came to me Monday morning as I watched Sarah Wilson confidently stride into what should have been my office. She'd already redecorated, replacing the practical workspace with trendy furniture and motivational posters about thinking outside the box. "Michael!" She waved me over with the enthusiasm of someone who had no idea how much she was about to depend on me. "Dad says you're going to help me understand all the technical stuff. That's so great. I'm more of a people person, so I'll handle the leadership side while you handle the, boring details." Boring details. Like the system that was about to save the company $2 million annually. "Of course," I said evenly. "I'm here to help however I can." And I was. But as I sat down at my computer that morning, something nagged at the back of my mind. Something about my employment contract. Something I'd barely paid attention to when I signed it 15 years ago. A small clause that Richard's lawyers had probably forgotten about, but I'd insisted on including after reading a horror story about engineers losing their intellectual property rights. Clause 9.4. I pulled up my contract file and found what I was looking for. There it was, buried in the legal language. Employee retains full intellectual property rights to any systems, processes, or innovations developed independently or as primary developer, provided said innovations were created while in good standing, and company has not fulfilled agreed-upon advancement opportunities as outlined in annual reviews. I read it 3 times, my heart beginning to race. Every annual review for the past 5 years had included advancement recommendations that had never materialized. Every performance evaluation had documented my role as primary developer on multiple systems, including the quality control automation that was now the crown jewel of the company's future plans. And I'd been careful. Very careful. All the development work on the system had been done on my personal equipment during my own time, then presented to the company as a completed project. Every email, every document, every line of code was backed up on my personal servers. Sarah spent her first week as my supervisor implementing efficiency improvements that mostly involved reorganizing the office supplies and instituting a mandatory daily check-in meeting where she could touch base with the team's energy levels. Meanwhile, I quietly began documenting everything. Every conversation about the quality control system, every meeting where my work was discussed, every instance where Sarah claimed credit for ideas she didn't understand. It was during one of these meetings that I overheard something that changed everything. Richard was on a phone call in his office, door cracked open just enough for his voice to carry into the hallway. I was walking by when I heard my name. "The quality control system is the key to everything," he was saying. "We're talking about a valuation increase of 15 to 20 million if we can show potential buyers that we've solved the automation problem." Thompson did brilliant work, but now that Sarah's overseeing it, we can position it as next-generation leadership innovation. There was a pause. "Next quarter? We'll have the system fully implemented by then, and Sarah will have enough time to establish herself as the creative force behind it. By the time we go to market, she'll be the face of our technical innovation." I stood frozen in the hallway as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about nepotism or office politics. This was about stealing my work to inflate the company's value for a sale, with Sarah positioned as the technical mastermind who would stay on to ensure continuity for new owners. That night, I pulled out my contract again and read Clause 9.4 one more time. Then I called my lawyer. "John, it's Michael Thompson. I need to ask you about intellectual property law." "Sure, Michael. What's the situation?" I explained everything. The promotion that never came, Sarah's appointment, the overheard conversation about the company sale. "And you have documentation of your role as primary developer?" "Everything. Emails, performance reviews, development logs. I even have the original research and prototypes on my personal equipment." There was a long pause. "Michael, if what you're telling me is accurate, and if that clause is written the way you described, you might have significant leverage here. But are you sure you want to go down this road?" I thought about Jake's baseball game. I thought about 15 years of broken promises to my family. I thought about watching Sarah take credit for work that had consumed my nights and weekends for the better part of 2 years. "I'm sure, John. Draft me a resignation letter and make sure Clause 9.4 is prominently mentioned." The next morning, I arrived at the office early as always, but instead of diving into work, I spent the time preparing. I backed up every file, every document, every piece of evidence that supported my case. I compiled a comprehensive portfolio of my work on the quality control system, complete with timestamps and development logs. At exactly 3 p.m., I walked into Richard Wilson's office with an envelope in my hand. "Richard, I need to speak with you." He looked up from his computer with mild irritation. "Make it quick, Michael. I'm trying to finish up some projections for potential investors. I won't take much of your time." I placed the envelope on his desk. "This is my formal resignation." His expression shifted from irritation to surprise, then to something that almost looked like amusement. "Resignation? Michael, come on. I know the Sarah situation is an adjustment, but it's not an adjustment. It's theft." Now he looked genuinely confused. "Theft? What are you talking about?" "The quality control system. My work. My innovation. You're planning to sell the company based on technology I developed, with your daughter taking credit as the creative force behind it." Richard's face hardened. "That's company property, Michael. Anything developed on company time belongs to the company. You know that." "Actually, it doesn't." I nodded toward the envelope. "You should read that carefully, especially the last paragraph." He opened the letter with the confidence of a man who'd never had his authority seriously challenged. I watched his expression change as he read through the standard resignation language. Then he reached the final paragraph. "As per clause 9.4 of my employment contract, I hereby assert my retained intellectual property rights to all systems and innovations developed during my tenure, specifically including but not limited to the automated quality control system currently being positioned as a primary asset for potential acquisition discussions." His face went pale. What is Clause 9.4? "You should ask your lawyer, but basically, it means I own the system. All of it. The code, the processes, the implementation strategy, everything." Richard's hands began to tremble slightly as he set the letter down. This can't be real. Everything developed here belongs to the company." I pulled out a second document and placed it next to my resignation. "That's my original employment contract. Page 7, paragraph 3. Your lawyers agreed to that clause 15 years ago, probably because they never imagined someone would actually use it. He grabbed the contract and flipped to page 7. I watched him read clause 9.4 once, twice, 3 times. With each reading, the color drained further from his face. "You can't do this," he said finally. "We have investors. We have commitments. You had an employee with 15 years of documented exceptional performance reviews who was passed over for promotion in favor of your unqualified daughter. You chose nepotism over merit. Now you get to live with the consequences. Michael, let's be reasonable here. We can work something out. A promotion, a raise, whatever you want. What I want is for you to understand that actions have consequences. What I want is for Sarah to learn that the real world doesn't hand out participation trophies. What I want is for you to realize that loyalty is a two-way street." I stood up and walked toward the door. "You have 48 hours to respond to my resignation. After that, I'll be implementing the shutdown protocols for the quality control system." "Wait," Richard's voice cracked slightly. "Is this real? Can you actually do this?" I turned back to look at him one final time. The confident businessman who'd lectured me about dedication and being a team player was gone, replaced by a frightened man who'd just realized he'd bet his company's future on stolen goods. I simply nodded and walked away. As I passed Sarah's office, I could see her through the glass walls, completely absorbed in her phone, probably planning her weekend shopping trip. She had no idea that her brief reign as a technical executive was about to come to a very abrupt end. But she was about to find out. The next 24 hours were the longest of Richard Wilson's professional life. I know this because he called me 14 times, sent 17 emails, and even showed up at my house at 7:30 p.m. with what he probably thought was an irresistible offer. "Michael, please, let's talk about this like reasonable adults." He stood on my front porch, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His tie was crooked. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Linda appeared beside me in the doorway, her protective instincts clearly activated. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "I need to speak with your husband about a misunderstanding at work." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "It's a contractual obligation that you're finally being forced to honor. Look, I'll double your salary, triple it. Name your price." Jake peeked around the corner, his baseball glove in his hand. "Dad, is everything okay?" I put my arm around my son's shoulders. "Everything's fine, buddy. Mr. Wilson was just leaving." "Wait, please." Richard's voice took on a desperate edge. "The investors are flying in tomorrow. We have a presentation scheduled. Without the quality control system." "Without my quality control system," I corrected. "The one I developed on my own time with my own resources. The one you were planning to sell as your daughter's innovation." Richard's face flushed red. "Sarah contributed to that project. She provided oversight, strategic direction. She provided Instagram breaks and coffee orders. We both know it." Linda squeezed my hand, a silent signal that I was handling this exactly right. After 15 years of watching me come home defeated and overlooked, she was finally seeing me stand up for myself. "Michael, be reasonable. Think about your colleagues, Jennifer, Tom, the whole technical team. If this deal falls through, there will be layoffs. People will lose their jobs." It was a low blow, trying to make me feel responsible for the consequences of his poor decision-making. "You should have thought about that before you decided nepotism was more important than competence. I'll give you Sarah's position, right now, today. You can be the department head you always wanted to be." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had dangled promotion in front of me like a carrot for 5 years, who had made me miss countless family moments in pursuit of a goal he never intended to let me reach. "Richard, do you know what Jake asked me last week?" He looked confused by the change of subject. "He asked me if I thought being loyal was stupid, because he's watched me be loyal to your company for his entire life, and all it's gotten me is more work and less recognition." I pulled Jake closer. I told him that loyalty is only valuable when it's mutual, when it's respected. "So what will it take? Just tell me what you want. I want you to understand that some things can't be bought. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt." I stepped back into my house. "You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to respond to my resignation formally. After that, I start shutdown procedures." I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Through the window, I watched Richard stand on my porch for a full minute, probably trying to process the fact that his backup plan had just evaporated. "Dad?" Jake looked up at me with wide eyes. "Are you in trouble at work?" "No, son. For the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The next morning, I arrived at the office to find chaos. Word had somehow leaked about my resignation and its implications. Jennifer was waiting by my desk with a cup of coffee and a worried expression. "Michael, what's going on?" Richard called an emergency meeting for all department heads, and Sarah's been crying in her office for an hour. Sarah's crying. Apparently, Richard explained the situation to her last night. She had no idea about the legal implications of your work. Jennifer lowered her voice. "She's scared she's going to be fired." I felt a small pang of sympathy. Sarah was spoiled and entitled, but she was also a 24-year-old who'd been thrust into a situation she was completely unprepared for. Her father had set her up for failure as much as he'd set me up for exploitation. What about the investor presentation? Postponed indefinitely. Richard's been on the phone with lawyers since 6 a.m. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone rang. Richard's secretary, Margaret, was on the line. "Michael, Mr. Wilson would like to see you in the conference room immediately." When I walked into the conference room, I found Richard sitting across from 2 men in expensive suits who were obviously attorneys. Sarah was there too, her eyes red from crying, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Michael, please sit down." Richard's voice was carefully controlled. "I'd like you to meet my legal counsel, David Brennan and James Morton." I nodded to the lawyers and took a seat across from them. "Mr. Thompson," the older attorney, Brennan, began, "we've reviewed your employment contract and the specific clause you've cited. We need to understand the full scope of your claims." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and slid it across the table. "That's a complete development log for the quality control system. Timestamps, code repositories, hardware purchases, testing protocols. Everything was developed independently between 2022 and 2024. Morton flipped through the documentation, his expression growing more serious with each page. These timestamps, much of this work was done outside normal business hours. Nights, weekends, vacation days. I was trying to create something that would secure my future at this company. Ironically, it's doing exactly that, just not in the way anyone expected. "Mr. Thompson," Brennan said carefully, What would it take to resolve the situation amicably? I looked around the table. Richard was sweating despite the air conditioning. Sarah was staring at her hands. The lawyers were clearly calculating the cost of a legal battle they probably couldn't win. I want fair compensation for my work. I want recognition for my contributions. And I want assurance that this kind of situation never happens to another employee here. Define fair compensation, Morton said. I'd spent the previous evening researching intellectual property valuations and consulting with my own attorney. Based on the projected savings and revenue generation potential, I believe $5 million is reasonable for a complete transfer of rights back to the company. Richard's face went white. $5 million? That's impossible. We don't have that kind of cash flow. Then you'll need to find it. Or you can try to proceed without the system and explain to your investors why your primary technological advantage has disappeared. Sarah spoke for the first time. Michael, I'm sorry. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I didn't understand what I was walking into. Dad told me it would be good experience, that I could learn from the best people. I never meant to take credit for your work. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated emotion. What I saw instead was genuine remorse and the dawning realization of how she'd been used as a pawn in her father's game. Sarah, this isn't really about you. It's about a system that rewards connections over competence. You're as much a victim of that system as I am. She looked up at me with surprise. But I took your promotion. You took a position you weren't qualified for because your father offered it to you. Any rational person would have done the same thing. The problem isn't that you accepted it. The problem is that it was offered in the first place. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The lawyers were taking notes furiously. Mr. Thompson, Brennan said, would you consider a structured settlement? Partial payment now, with additional compensation tied to future company performance? No. This isn't a negotiation about terms. This is about recognition of ownership rights that already exist. I stood up. You have until 5 p.m. today to present a formal offer. Otherwise, I begin shutdown procedures tomorrow morning. As I reached the door, Richard called out, Michael, wait. What if we restructured things? What if you became the CTO? Full equity stake, decision-making authority. I turned back. Richard, you've spent 5 years teaching me that my value to this company is as a worker, not a leader. You've shown me exactly how much my loyalty and expertise are worth to you. Why would I want to stay somewhere I've been so clearly undervalued? Because we can fix this. We can make it right. You can make it legal, but you can't make it right. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. That afternoon, my phone didn't stop ringing. First, it was Richard, then the lawyers, then colleagues who'd heard rumors and wanted to know what was happening. By 3 p.m., news of the situation had somehow reached the investor group, and their representatives were demanding emergency meetings. At 4:47 p.m., Margaret called. Michael, Mr. Wilson asked me to deliver this to you personally. She handed me an envelope with shaking hands. He also asked me to tell you that he hopes you'll reconsider. Inside was a formal offer, $4.8 million for complete transfer of intellectual property rights, plus a consulting agreement that would pay me $200,000 annually for 3 years to ensure smooth implementation and maintenance of the system. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was validation that my work had real, quantifiable value. It was proof that 15 years of dedication hadn't been wasted. But more than that, it was power. For the first time in my career, I was negotiating from a position of strength. I called my lawyer. John, they've made an offer. $4.8 million plus consulting fees. That's substantial, Michael. It shows they're taking this seriously. What do you think? I think you've already won. The question now is whether you want to cash out or continue working with people who've shown you how little they value you. That evening, I sat in my backyard with Linda and Jake, watching him practice his pitching motion against the garage door. The rhythmic thunk of the baseball hitting the metal was oddly soothing. So, what are you going to do? Linda asked. I'm going to accept their offer, I said, but I'm not going back to work there. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going to take their money, fulfill the consulting agreement remotely, and start something new. Something where loyalty and competence actually matter. Jake stopped throwing and turned to us. Does this mean you can come to my championship game on Saturday? I smiled. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. The next morning, I delivered my acceptance letter to Richard's office. He was waiting with the lawyers, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in the past week. The terms are acceptable, I said simply. I'll need the funds transferred within 5 business days, and the consulting agreement should specify that all work will be performed remotely. Remotely? Richard looked confused. But we'll need you here for implementation, for training the team. I'll provide comprehensive documentation and be available for video conferences. But I won't be returning to work in this building. Michael, I know things got complicated, but we can move past this. You're too valuable to lose entirely. I looked around his office one last time. The awards on the wall, the family photos featuring Sarah in her graduation cap, the view of the parking lot where I'd spent so many late nights that I'd worn a path in the asphalt to my usual spot. Richard, you taught me something very important this week. You taught me that my value doesn't depend on your recognition. My work speaks for itself, and now it's spoken loud enough for the whole industry to hear. What does that mean? It means I've already received inquiries from 3 of your competitors who are very interested in discussing future projects. It means Jennifer and Tom have both asked about opportunities to work with me independently. It means your decision to promote Sarah over me didn't just cost you money, it cost you the foundation of your technical team. The color drained from his face. You're starting a competing business. I'm starting a business that values competence over connections. What happens between us competitively will depend entirely on how well you manage without the people who actually created your technological advantages. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office, a converted garage behind my house that Linda had helped me transform into a proper workspace. The consulting payments from Wilson Engineering were covering our expenses while I built something new, something that reflected the values I'd always believed in but had never seen properly implemented. Jake burst through the door, still wearing his varsity baseball uniform. Dad, we won! We actually won the state championship. I spun around in my chair and grabbed him in a hug. I know. I was there. That W hit in the 7th inning was incredible. You were there for the whole game, the whole tournament. Mom said it's because you finally found a job that respects your time. She's right. But more than that, I found work that respects the person doing it. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jennifer. Tom and I have been talking. When can we discuss that opportunity you mentioned? I looked at Jake, still glowing with the satisfaction of his championship victory, and then at the email inbox full of inquiries from potential clients who'd heard about someone willing to prioritize substance over politics. Dad? Jake was looking at me with curiosity. Do you miss your old job? I thought about Richard Wilson, probably working late again, trying to manage a technical team that was hemorrhaging talent. I thought about Sarah, hopefully learning valuable lessons about the difference between authority and competence. I thought about all the nights I'd missed, all the promises I'd broken, all the years I'd spent believing that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. You know what, Jake? I've learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering you're worth more than someone else is willing to pay. It forces you to find people who understand your real value. So you're happier now? I looked around my makeshift office, then out the window where Linda was gardening and humming to herself. For the first time in 15 years, I had control over my schedule, my projects, and my future. The consulting money from Wilson Engineering was nice, but the freedom to build something authentic was priceless. Happier doesn't begin to cover it, son. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That night, as I was closing up the office, my phone rang one last time. It was Richard. Michael, I wanted to call, and, well, I wanted to say that you were right. About everything. Richard? Sarah quit today. She said she couldn't handle the pressure of trying to fill shoes that were never meant for her in the first place. She's going back to school thinking about teaching. He paused. She said you were kind to her during the settlement meeting. That meant a lot. She's not a bad person, Richard. She was just put in an impossible situation. The investors pulled out. Without the quality control system, and without the team that understood it, they didn't see the value proposition anymore. I felt a pang of sympathy, but not regret. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? I considered the question. I'm sorry that it came to this. I'm sorry that 15 years of good faith and hard work had to end with lawyers and ultimatums. But I'm not sorry that actions finally had consequences. I've been thinking about what you said, about loyalty being a two-way street. You're right. I took your loyalty for granted, and I paid the price for it. What are you going to do now? Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe it's time to retire. Maybe it's time to let someone else try to rebuild what I broke. Another pause. Michael? Yes. Clause 9.4. Did you know it was there all along? I smiled in the darkness of my garage office. Richard, I've always believed in reading the fine print. You taught me that the first week I worked for you. You said, Michael, in business, the details matter. The small print is where the real agreements are made. I said that? You did, and you were right. The small print is exactly where the real agreements are made. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my new workspace, surrounded by the tools and equipment I'd purchased with the settlement money. Tomorrow, Jennifer and Tom would be coming by to discuss joining my new venture. Next week, I had meetings with 2 potential clients who wanted innovative automation solutions. But tonight, I was just a man who had finally learned that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. I turned off the lights and headed inside, where my family was waiting with leftover celebration cake from Jake's championship party. As I walked through the door, I realized that Clause 9.4 hadn't just saved my career. It had saved my life. Sometimes, the smallest lines carry the greatest power. You just have to be willing to read them